Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Cece. As you can see, I'm in a different location. I'm at the Tennessee property for the week. And as we're getting into the fall season, I thought I would show you guys more of a full aesthetic, creepy old shed vibe. I don't know. This also is a dead apple tree, so apples fall, you know, the whole thing. Okay, it looks like I actually have paint in my hair. And yeah, I've been painting all day inside the house, painting with green paint, and I have green paint in my hair. So apparently at some point I stuck my head to the wall. That's great. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this video. The first book I want to mention is a book that I actually DNF'd, but I do think that other people would probably like this book more than me, so I do want to mention it, especially for this time of year. Anyone who's looking for Christian Gothic books, this one is kind of perfect. It's called Gatehaven by Molly Noble Bull. And I've never heard of this author before, but I came across this book while doing research for Christian horror. I don't think this would necessarily be horror, but it definitely has occult things and supernatural things, but it is definitely Christian. It is very, very faith-filled. There are Christian characters and tons of scripture in this book. So it's definitely a Christian Gothic read, but it takes place during the Scottish Rebellion, like the time of the Outlander books. And it has castles and it has a revenge plot to it. I'm just not a fan of somebody holding on to a grudge for decades over something that's really stupid. So I had a hard time getting past that in a book. But it definitely is a book worth mentioning if you don't mind revenge plots. The next book I want to talk about, I am so glad that I read this book. And thanks to Ariane from Book Zealots for her talking about it recently, because that made me want to read it sooner rather than later. And that is The House of Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorn. I love this book. And I've been wanting to read The House of Seven Gables for decades, for a very long time. So I'm glad I finally got to it. I will say I was very surprised with how the book played out. It was very different from what I was expecting. I was expecting more of a haunted house story, which it really is not. It is a story about a house that has a curse, but I think the book is really about the relationship between the family members. I ended up doing a ton of research with this book, and that's one of my favorite things about reading is going down rabbit holes. But as I was reading this book, I thought that this book reminded me a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's writing. The writing style of this book is very descriptive and drawn out, and he has a lot of really long run-on sentences. And as I was reading, I just kept thinking, wow, this really reminds me of The Fall of the House of Usher by Poe in the writing style. And I love Poe's writing style, but I ended up doing a ton of research on Nathaniel Hawthorn, and he lived at the same time with Edgar Allan Poe, and they actually did know each other. There were a ton of other authors writing at the time in what they were calling the Romantic style, which is the style in which Nathaniel Hawthorn and Edgar Allan Poe writes. So it's no wonder that I really liked both authors, because they both write in the same style. And I also found out that Washington Irving lived at the same time, and they all knew each other, and he also wrote in the Romantic style, and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is one of my favorite books. So I just really learned something about the type of writing that I really like, type of classic book that I really like. So yeah, I just found all that interesting, and I went down that rabbit hole because of liking this book so much. I will definitely be picking up more from Nathaniel Hawthorn shortly. Next book I read is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, and this is really out of my norm, at least but the norm that I've had for the last few years. I'm really shocked that I've never read a Riley Sager book back in my horror reading days, but for whatever reason, I just never picked him up. But I've been seeing a lot of people talk about Home Before Dark, saying that it was a really good book, so I felt like it would be okay for me to read. Even though I'm trying to stay away from horror, I wasn't really sure what the book was. Just the title alone and the artwork on the cover makes me think it's a horror book, so I wasn't sure where it was going, and so I was just kind of nervous about it, but I wanted to give it a try. This book really confused me. I wasn't sure where it was trying to go for the most part. I was wondering, is this trying to be a thriller? Is it trying to be horror? Is it like, what is this? And I feel like there was a lot of parts of the story that were taken from the Amityville Horror, which makes sense because that book is referenced in this book. So the two stories are supposed to be related, but I feel like a lot of the actual scenes that are in the Amityville Horror were taken from that and put into this book as a scene in this book. Not just a reference to something that happened in Amityville. The scenes were reused, and I thought that was really weird. And back in my horror days, the Amityville Horror was my absolute favorite horror book. I loved the book and I loved the movie. So it was kind of weird reading this book because it was so heavily influenced by Amityville Horror, and I just kind of kept feeling like, well, if I'm going to be reading a book like this, I'd kind of rather be reading Amityville because that book is better, but that's not a book that I can be reading right now. So it was a very confusing time for me. Reading this book was very confusing, and I don't really like all the things that were going on in my head while I was reading it. So I only gave it 3 stars, but I probably would go even lower because the ending of the book, I did not like at all. There were so many plot twists in like the last 10 pages of the book. And it felt like it was kind of like a Scooby-Doo episode where they're like lifting off the mask of every, bad person in Scooby-Doo ever. It was so weird. Okay, moving on. The next book that I read, and I loved this book, was Sons of Blackbird Mountain by Joann Bischoff. This is Christian historical fiction, and it is one of the most Christian books that I have read. It had tons and tons of great faith. Loved it. It also takes place in my home state of Virginia, and actually it takes place in the area that my husband's family is originally from. It takes place in a county called Beaufort County. And when my husband's family came here from Germany, they actually immigrated to that exact county. And so I knew where the place was as I was reading about it, and I thought that was pretty cool. But this book had me hooked from the very beginning. It was a difficult read. There is alcoholism in this book, and some of the scenes with that were really hard to read. My dad was an alcoholic, so I definitely relate to stuff that was going on in the book. But I was just so in love with the characters of this book. It's about a woman, an Irish woman, who was in an Irish workhouse, and she ended up marrying a man from Norway, Denmark, one of those countries. And not too long after they're married, he dies, and his aunt, who lives here in America, sends her a letter and says, hey, come live with me and my nephews and we will take care of you. And so she gets on a boat and she comes to America, and she's thinking the nephews are children. She's thinking she's going to come over here and help take care of these kids. And when she gets here, she finds out that the aunt has passed away and the kids are actually grown men. And so the grown men, who are cousins of her husband, take her in, and the story goes from there. All of that stuff is the very, very beginning. This book was so beautiful and so heartfelt and so faith-filled. It's perfect for autumn. They own an apple orchard in Virginia, and there's scenes of picking the apples and making cider and making like jelly and jam and pies and all that sort of thing. And it runs from the end of summer to Thanksgiving. So it's perfect read for right now. definitely recommend that book. Okay, the last book that I finished in August was Monster by Frank Peretti. I really liked this book, but again, it was nothing like what I was expecting. It's kind of bizarre, but it is Frank Peretti, so that's kind of expected. I really can't give too much away about this one because there's a lot of stuff in there that is surprises. But it starts out with this husband and wife. They want to go spend a week on this mountain with some other people. They're going to go to learn survival skills. And they go up the mountain and set up their little campsite. And then all of these crazy noises happen in the middle of the night. And a fight ensues. And the wife gets taken. I can't say any more than that. But the wife gets taken, and so the whole rest of the book is what the wife is going through and how the husband is trying to find her. It's insane. This book is insane. But it's very fast-paced. There is just so much happening in this book. I just kept turning the pages. There is stuff in this book about DNA, like gene splicing type of stuff. It actually reminded me of the Rambo movies and Island of Dr. Moreau, if you kind of mix those things together. And I think that this would be a really good book for men in particular. The whole time I was reading it, I thought, wow, this is a dude's book. This book is for dudes. But I did really like it. Not as much as This Present Darkness. I don't think any book can compare to This Present Darkness, but it was really good, and there was faith in it, so I did really like that. So yeah, those are the last books that I read in the month of August. If you guys have read any of these books and you have any thoughts on them, I'd love to hear it. I hope y'all are having a great day, and I will see y'all soon. Bye.